to talk about delayed dormant sprays, and this is actually great timing. It's warm here where I am in Logan. I'm sure it's warm where you guys are as well, but weather changes. So it's good to know what's the right time to do delayed dormant spray. And the first thing I want to make sure of is that you understand the definition of dormancy versus delayed dormant. So dormancy is just the period between leaf fall and spring growth. So the plants are not growing, as opposed to delayed dormancy, which is a very short period during the initial spring growth. And during this time, it actually coincides with any insects that are overwintering in the tree or the shrub are also becoming, their juices are flowing, they're getting a little bit active as well. So they're more susceptible to any kind of spray that's applied at that time. And another reason why this delayed dormant spray is a really great thing to do is because our beneficials are not active at that time, like the lady beetles and the lacewings and other things. So it's a great time to put on a spray to target the pests. So what I'm going to cover is when to spray, what to spray with, and what are the target pests with that spray. So as far as when to spray, again, I mentioned we're at the great timing now. We're in March. For you guys in Idaho, I'm sure your temperatures range. You have mountainous areas, so the timing could be anywhere from March to May. But in reality, it's really going to depend on the growth stage of your own plant. So you can never really say, okay, March 1 is always the best time to do the delayed dormant spray. You really should do it when the buds start to swell. And again, that's that period when the insects also start getting a little active. So if you look at it on fruit trees, they actually have special names for the fruit tree bud stages. So for example, on apple, you could spray your dormant spray anywhere in this timing that you see these bud stages. So what's called silver tip to where those leaves are just expanding, called half-inch green. So that would be the timing or that range that you could do it. Pears, very similar. It's when those buds start expanding until, before bloom. So if you look at this picture on the pear, you can see the bud, all the brown parts and the green parts. So really what you want to look for on any plant that you're going to do a delayed dormant spray is, are you starting to see some of that green on the bud? Has it swollen up? That just means the bud's expanding. Cherries. So if you look at these pictures, the same idea. You have that swollen bud, you're starting to see some green, and then all the way till what's called tight cluster, which again, that's right before bloom. So once any fruit tree has started to bloom, it's really too late. Plums, so this again, the same idea. You get those buds starting to swell, you see some green, and then maybe the flower buds are starting to get a lot bigger. And then the delayed dormant spray can also be applied to your ornamentals because there's plenty of pests on those plants as well. But it's the same idea. The ideal time is when those buds have swollen. So on the far left is a linden. The next picture is a sycamore, and then a rose. And then on the far right is honey locust. So it's the same theme, that swollen bud and the green showing through the bud. That is your timing. All right, that's when to spray. Now what to use? Most of the time when people think about a dormant or delayed dormant spray, it's some type of oil that's applied. So oils that are made for applying onto plants are highly refined. They're lightweight and they're formulated specifically for plants so that they don't cause damage. They also include an emulsifying agent. So you think about oil, you're mixing it with water, typically it is going to separate, but the products that are formulated for plants have a material in them so that when the water is mixed with the oil, it stays in a suspension, meaning the oil mixes with the water and doesn't settle. So when the oil is sprayed onto the plant, the idea is to get the oil to land on the insect, the eggs, or whatever you're targeting. So that would be called direct contact, meaning there's no after effect of the oil. Once it's sprayed, that's when it does its job. An hour later, and something maybe comes along into the oil, it's not doing anything. When it lands on the insect or the egg, it works by suffocating that particular part or life stage of the insect. It clogs the breathing tubes. All right, so oils are typically broken out into two groups. And the first one are the petroleum-based oils. And most people call these types of oils horticultural oil. Like you'll hear that term all the time, horticultural oil, but some people also call them dormant oil. And they're just derived from highly saturated paraffinic petroleum. And the ingredient on the bottle mostly will say mineral oil. Paraffinic oil could also be listed as well. But if you look at all these products here that are available now, you'll find these in the big box store or your farm store or your local garden center. They'll say, like I said here, either dormant spray, a lot of these say dormant spray, dormant oil, horticultural oil, etc. And the one on the far right says all seasons oil. And I'll explain that in a minute. These all can be used for the dormant time, but they can also be used when the plants are actively growing. The other group of oils are the plant-based oils. And canola is one ingredient that has been used for these plant-based oils. Bayer makes one of those. And then you guys are, I'm sure, are familiar with neem oil. So there's several different brands of neem oil. There's also sesame oil, and then there's products that use essential oils like thyme, rosemary, clove, and others. So even though these are all considered oils, I would say that if you wanted to go with a plant-based oil as your dormant or delayed dormant spray, to go with the canola oil. It's going to be most effective of these for that delayed dormant timing. Neem oil will be the next most effective. The horticultural oils are superior in their effectiveness to the plant-based oils, but again, the plant-based oils would be an option to use. So just a little information about how to use the oil and the rate. Definitely read the label, because what I have here may not be what's written on the label. So follow what's on the label. Also, what I have here really does apply to the horticultural oil. Again, the petroleum-based oil. And a lot of those petroleum-based oils are considered organic. For applying your delayed dormant spray, so what's shown here is a 2% to 3% mixture of oil. And that would be the rate, anywhere from 2 to 3% for your delayed dormant spray. So you want to have a kind of higher rate of oil. And there I've shown how much oil you would put to a gallon of water. And I mentioned that these oils can also be used during the growing season. So I just wanted to throw that in as well. Not talking about that so much, but that same oil can be used during the season, but at a much lower rate. So that you would use instead 1% mixture. All right, so getting back to the delayed dormant timing. So when you're spraying the plant, the shrub, the tree, you want to make sure to fully saturate the entire plant with the oil, because it needs to come into contact with whatever the target pest is. And some of these target pests, eggs or the overwintering insect stage, are in the cracks, the crevices, in between the buds. They're really tucked in. So you want to get really good coverage and make sure it gets the entire tree. Only use it when the temperatures are above 45 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's sprayed when it's cooler, then there's a greater chance of causing damage to the buds. But also, and this is where it gets tricky when you're trying to figure out when to make your spray, don't use it within 24 hours of frost, either before or after the spray. And the reason is that it just makes the plant a little more susceptible to injury from the oil. So you just make sure the daytime temperature is going to be above 45 and the nighttime temperatures are above 32. Also, I don't have it here, but also make sure it's not a windy day, so you don't want that oil spraying around. And then finally, just a little side note, don't mix oil with sulfur. Sulfur is a fungicide that people will use for powdery mildew, and Cap-10 is also a fungicide. So don't mix those with the oil because you can have damage to the buds. All right, some other cautions with oils. I often have people ask, well, can I just use the oil, the vegetable oil that's in my kitchen cabinet, or the mineral oil or cottonseed oil that's just in the workshop? So the answer is no. So these oils have not been refined, they've not been lightened up in their viscosity to be used on plants. And I'm sure there's a lot of ingredients online about using these oils. And so if you decided to do that, that would be your own decision to make, but we don't recommend that. And the reason is you'll have phytotoxicity. So you have damage to your plants. And here on the right, on the top right is a rose where the leaves were damaged in the bud stage for the delayed dormant spray. And as the leaves emerge, they're damaged. And on the lower right are just some damage from direct spray. So have a caution with that. And the other is also to be cautious when spraying conifers, like your pines or your spruce. So Colorado blue spruce, it's beautiful. We love it. And if you spray it with oil, as you can see in the picture on the left, it will remove that nice blue color. It doesn't harm the plant. It just doesn't look aesthetically as good. But the picture on the right does show that there was oil applied and then there was not a freezing event, but somewhere around 35 degrees. So the conifers are a little bit more sensitive to cold temperatures after oil has been applied. So those are some things to keep in mind with oils on conifers. So the other what to spray is a product called copper. And this would only be used for certain plant diseases. In particular, one that I'll mention is called fire blight on apple and pear. Copper would be used during this delayed dormant timing, targeting that particular pest. The nice thing about the copper is that it can be mixed with your oil, either the petroleum-based or the plant-based oil. So it could both be mixed together and applied as one spray. So with the copper, again, you can find these products at your local nursery, farm store, etc. There are two types that are available for home use, or two ingredients, I should say. So one is copper octanoate, and it is also considered a copper soap. So the products shown on the right there are examples of these coppers. These are the ones that I would recommend you lean toward because they have a much lower percentage of copper, but they're also very effective. And they can also, they're so low in their copper concentration, they can be used during the growing season as well for some diseases. The other kind of copper is copper diammonia diacetate complex. And Liquicop or Monterey is one that has that ingredient. So that one has a little bit higher copper concentration, and you would not want to use that during the growing season. But any of those would be okay to use if that's what you can find. So now I want to cover some of the targeted pests from the delayed dormant spray. Like, what are you going to be targeting? So aphids, of course. Aphids can be on your fruit trees and your ornamental plants, and scale insects, also on the fruit trees and ornamental plants. A specific pest called peach twig borer. Another one called blister mites, which will just be on apple and pear. And then a few pests on ornamentals, like one is called the honey locust pod gall midge. And then any insect pest that overwinters in the egg stage will also be susceptible to the delayed dormant spray. And then finally, a disease, fire blight. All right, so we'll start with the aphids. And here I have some example pictures of the fruit aphid pests. So we've got our green apple aphid, rosy apple aphid. On our peaches and apricots, there's green peach aphid. If you grow cherry, there's black cherry aphid, mealy plum aphid. So every fruit tree you can think of has a specific aphid. Some of them go to multiple trees. All of these cause the typical damage that you guys are familiar with, which is that curling of the leaves that can make the tree maybe lose vigor a little bit if there's a lot of leaf drop. So the reason aphids can be targeted by the delayed dormant oil is because they overwinter as eggs on the tree itself. So if you look at the picture on the right, these two little tiny shiny balls are aphid eggs. And on the left, all the black are aphid eggs. So like I said, you got to get that good coverage with the oil because those eggs are tucked into the buds and tight crevices. And then they'll hatch as soon as those buds start to swell. Some may hatch earlier than others. And if they're still in the egg stage, if the bud is swelling, that egg will be active and be very susceptible to the oil. All right, blister mites is a tiny, tiny microscopic organism, cannot see it with the naked eye, that can affect apples or pears. And they feed within these tiny little blisters on the leaves. Within each blister are several dozen mites, and the blisters can turn brown by the end of the summer. So on the right is on apple, and on the left is damage on pear. So those mites, they also overwinter on the tree. And in fact, they're in the bud scales. So when the bud starts to get bigger, then those mites, you can see all hundreds of mites here, start to become exposed and active. Then there are scales that people target with the delayed dormant spray. So if you're not familiar with scale, they are an immobile insect. They feed on twigs, limbs, and some of them feed on fruit. So this picture here is just the horizontal line is the surface of the bark, and then the body, the scale body on top. So it just sits immobile, and it has a mouth part called a stylet in which it inserts into the bark, sucking out sap for the rest of its life. So under heavy populations, it can weaken trees, kill limbs, and there are overwintering on the bark itself. So this picture on the lower left shows two scale bodies. And in the spring, these are females, they will lay their eggs underneath their bodies and the eggs will hatch, and there could be hundreds. So on the right, I have flipped over one of these scale bodies and exposing all those eggs underneath. So on our fruit trees, the main scale insect pest is called San Jose scale. Typically, people only notice this until it gets on the fruit, and it looks like little pimples or grains of pepper with a purple halo. But the scales mostly reside on the bark, twigs, and branches itself. And this is the area, of course, that would be targeted by the dormant oil spray. On the left is another scale called Lacanium scale, and it's just a brown half circular ball or lump as it's matured. The smaller ones are the nymphs. They're not fully grown yet. And then on the right is the European elm scale. On the left is Cottony maple scale, and this picture was taken in the summer. So in the winter or during the delayed dormant spray, it would just be these flat brown bodies. But this is showing the eggs that are getting ready to hatch. On the right is oyster shell scale that is becoming much more of a pest over the last few years. And then the conifers can have scales as well. So we have on the left black pine leaf scale, and on the right, these small scales are called pine needle scales. And finally, I believe you guys do not have the scale pest in your area, but it's called sycamore scale, and it is working its way north. It overwinters on the bark itself, and then once the crawlers hatch, they move to the leaves. And this picture on the left, each one of these little spots is an actual scale that's feeding on the underside of the leaf. All right, peach twig borer is a specific pest of peaches and apricot that can really do some damage if you guys have this and are growing peaches. It feeds on the fruit when the fruit starts to ripen, and also feeds inside the newly growing succulent twigs. But it's targeted by the delayed dormant spray because it overwinters as a larva in protected areas of the tree. And in early spring, the larvae hatches. So either stage would be susceptible to that spray. On the ornamentals, if you guys have honey locust, I often see this particular pest called the honey locust pod gall midge. And on the left, this is a leaf of honey locust, but all these red areas, they would be leaves if it was normal, but instead it's the little midge that's feeding within the leaf and causing that gall. And on the right are the adults. So the adults lay their eggs right along the edges of the buds, and that's what would be targeted with the delayed dormant spray. And if you don't target it, then you'll have a lot of leaf drop. And then there's overwintering insect eggs, as I mentioned, and they would also be targeted by the delayed dormant spray. So on the far left are eggs of a caterpillar pest called cankerworm that just feeds for about 6 to 7 weeks in the spring on a wide variety of hardwood species. In the middle is an egg mass of a tent caterpillar, and these are not really found in wide multitude of places. They'll be very scattered throughout the landscape. And then on the far right is an interesting looking egg mass, and that's of leaf roller caterpillars. So the final pest I wanted to mention that would be targeted by your delayed dormant spray is fire blight. And I would imagine you're familiar with fire blight. It infects through the flowers, and it causes that flower cluster to wilt and then turn brown on apple or black on pear, and then it can spread throughout the tree. But the delayed dormant spray, what it's targeting is these overwintering old infections. So these old infections of fire blight will start to ooze the bacteria in early spring. And the copper, so copper is what's used for fire blight, targets those cankers, and it prevents the bacteria from multiplying. So it doesn't kill it, just prevents it from multiplying. So that's one tool for this pest. So finally, I wanted to mention a few pests, and there's a lot more, but a few pests that are not controlled with a dormant or delayed dormant spray. And I mention these because I often get questions about codling moth, for example, which is the worm in the apple. When I do my delayed dormant spray, I'm going to take care of my codling moths. But unfortunately, that's not the case because they overwinter in a variety of different places, and they also can come in from other plants. And then spider mites are not managed with the delayed dormant spray because they overwinter in the ground, in protected areas of the ground cover. So they're not in the tree. Borers are not targeted because they're within the tree itself. So the oil is not going to get to the borers. And then powdery mildew is not targeted either because it overwinters mostly on leaves that have fallen from the previous season. The timing is actually not so tricky. The tricky part is finding the opportunity to be able to spray. Like you may find, oh, okay, I'm ready to spray, the buds are swollen, but then all of a sudden you look at the forecast and you're going to have 5 days of rain, or you're going to have 5 days where it's going to get the 20s that night. So and then maybe you missed out on the spray and it's too late. So I often get questions about, oh, I missed my dormant oil spray. Don't worry. You may have, you really, like I said, you're targeting some aphids and some scale, but it's not the end of the world if you miss it.
I kind of got an anecdotal story there. One year when I was down in Price, I had some plum trees and they had that aphid curl really bad in the springtime. And I was kind of busy and it was kind of late. So, I'm too late for the delayed dormant spray here. And I really don't want to spray. And so I said, okay, I'll wait till next year. And I got busy that next spring and did not have, I didn't get them sprayed, but I had absolutely no aphid leaf curl either the next year. The beneficials, the ladybugs and the lacewings and all those kinds of things took care of it for me. And so, sometimes you don't need to spray.
Exactly. Sometimes it's better to leave it as food for the beneficial. Here's my contact info. I'll leave this up for a moment. And I know you have Reed or you have Ron you could contact if you had questions, but I am also happy to answer questions as well.